Hey everybody, this is Miss Morales here, and we are going to start our first online lesson. Before we go into our lesson, I do want to start off with a warm-up. We need to recall how to factor quadratics. So say we were given this quadratic, and I want you guys to factor this. Remember two things. One, see if there's any common factor between all three terms and factor that out first. And then two, once you do that, then you can use the X method to factor. So go ahead and pause the video, try it on your own, and then play the video when you're ready to see the answer. Okay, so the first thing that you should see is that 14, 60, and 54, they all have a 2 in common. So we can put a 2 out front, and that would leave us with 7x squared minus 30x plus 27. Once we do that, then we can make our x, and then we're going to fill everything in. Now, if you can recall, the top part of the x is our a times c. Our a is 7, and our c is 27. So in the top, it's going to be 7 times 27. So that gives us 189. And then in the bottom part of the x is our b, and that's negative 30. So that will go to the bottom. Now you just have to figure out two numbers that are going to multiply to give you 189, but they're going to add to negative 30. Okay, two numbers that will work are negative 9 and negative 21. But because we have an a value of 7, we also have to divide both of those numbers by 7. And this one here, it simplifies. So don't forget to simplify your fractions if you can, and that just turns to negative 3. Now, with these two values here, these will tell us how to factor our quadratic. So going back to here, this now factors to a 7x minus 9 and then x minus 3. And do not forget this 2 out here in front. There you go. That's the answer to your warm-up. Okay, so moving on to today's lesson, we're going to call this 7.4. And we can title it Solving Quadratics by Factoring. So when we multiply two things, a times b, and we say that's equal to 0, that means two things. Either a is equal to 0 or b is equal to 0. Let's go into our first example. Okay, say we have these two binomials, 7x minus 6 times x plus 3, and that's equal to 0. That means two things. Either 7x minus 6 is equal to 0, or x plus 3 is equal to 0. Now we can actually solve for x for both scenarios. That will tell us when our quadratic is equal to 0. Okay, so on the left one, we can add 6 to both sides and then divide by 7, and that will give us x is equal to 6 over 7. That will be one answer. And for the other one, we just subtract 3 to both sides, and that will give us x is equal to negative 3. That will be the other answer. And that's it. So moving forward, we're going to practice solving different types of quadratics, ones that have a common factor, or ones where we're going to have to use the AX method, like our warm-up. But it all has the same steps, where we have to set each one equal to 0 and solve for x. Okay, so moving on to another example. Say we're given this quadratic x squared plus 8x is equal to 0, and we're going to solve for x. Okay, first step for this one is to see if both of your terms, x squared and ax, have anything in common, and they do. They both have an x in common, so we're going to put that out front. And what's left over for the first term is an x, bring down the plus sign, and for the second term, an 8 is left over. And hey, that's already factored. So now what we do is we're going to set each one of these terms x equal to 0, and the other term x plus 8 is equal to 0. Back to the first thing that we said in our notes. What's really cool, this one's already solved for us. And then now the other one, we just have to subtract 8, and then we get x is negative 8. So when you don't have to use the x method, it's a pretty quick and easy problem. So always check to see if they have a common factor first. Okay, let's move on to a little bit harder of an example. Okay, so right away you guys should notice that this doesn't look like the other two problems that we started with. The main reason is we don't have this set equal to 0. Well, we can fix that. We just have to subtract 80 to both sides. And now it looks like the previous two problems. Remember what I said, always check to see if there's a common factor. For this one, you should see that 5, 30, and 80, they all have a 5 in common. So I'm going to bring the 5 out front, leaving me with k squared plus 6k minus 16 equals to 0. Okay, so now we're going to make our x, because we need to factor that quadratic inside. We know that b is 6 and c is negative 16. So negative 16 goes on the top, 6 on the bottom, and now we have to think of two numbers that multiply to negative 16 that add to 6. So we get negative 8 and 2. We don't have an a value in this quadratic, so we don't have to divide by anything. Those are our factors, and we can write this out as 5 times k minus 8 times k plus 2 is equal to 0. Now, when we solve for this, if we were to divide both sides by 5, these 5's cancel, leaving us with k minus 8 times k plus 2 on the left side and 0 on the right side. Then we set each of our binomials equal to 0. And then we can solve for each one. So add 8. One answer could be k equals to 8. And the other answer is k is equal to negative 2. Also, just note that another way you could write this is with curly braces, negative 2 comma 8. Sometimes you'll see your answer written like this. And that's fine too. Okay, let's have you guys try a problem on your own. So I do want you guys to try pausing this video before you watch me how to do the problem. Okay, so the problem is 3n squared is equal to negative 16n minus 5. So try pausing the video and solving this on your own, and then playing it when you're ready to see the answer worked out. Okay, let's go through it. So the first thing that you guys should do is set your quadratic equal to 0. So we're going to add 16n and also add 5 to both sides. So on the left side, we get 3n squared plus 16n plus 5, and on the right side, we get 0. So good. Our first step is to set the quadratic equal to 0. All right, the second step is to check to see if all three terms have something in common. So 3, 16, and 5, all those numbers, they don't have anything in common, and they all don't have an n in common. So we're just going to go straight into our x method. A is 3, B is 16, and C is 5. So on the top part of our x, we're going to multiply our A times C to get 15, and the bottom part of our x is our 16. Now think of two numbers that multiply to 15, but add to 16, and you should get 15 and 1. But since our quadratic has an A value, we do have to divide both of those numbers by our A value of 3. Also check to see if any of them simplify, and the left one does. 15 divided by 3 is just 5. Now we can write out our quadratic in factored form, and we get n plus 5 and 3n plus 1, and it's still equal to 0. All right, the next step you should do is set each of your factors equal to 0. So we can solve for n on the left one, subtract 5. We get n is equal to -5 is one of our answers. And for the other one, we can subtract 1 and divide by 3. We get n is equal to -1/3. If you want, you can write it in this form. And that also works. Okay, moving on to our next example, and this will be our last one. So, say we were given a quadratic, 3x squared plus 17x plus 1 is equal to 7. Again, we want to solve. Again, our quadratic, it has to be set equal to 0 first, so we're going to subtract the 7 to both sides, giving us 3x squared plus 17x minus 6 is equal to 0. From there, we check, does the three terms, 3x squared, 17x, and -6, do they all have something in common? They don't, so we can go ahead and go straight into making our x. At the top part of our x is our a times c. We know that a is 3 and c is -6, so we multiply 3 times -6 to give us -18 for the top part of the x. And then we also know that our b is 17, so then the bottom number in our x will be 17. Two numbers that would make the top part -18 when we multiply, and the bottom part 17 when we add, is 18 and -1. But because our quadratic has an a value of 3, then we're going to divide both of our values by 3, and the left one actually simplifies down to 6. So that means we would factor this into x plus 6 and 3x minus 1, and that will be equal to 0. Okay, so next step is we're going to set each of our factors equal to 0 and solve for x for each one. So on the left side, we're going to subtract -6, giving us x is equal to -6. And on the right side, we're going to add 1 and divide by 3. So our answer is x is equal to 1/3. Now, I do want you guys to notice something here, that if we look back at our original x, we had 6 and negative 1/3 were our two values before we put it into factored form. You can also notice that our answers are actually the opposite signs of our values. So our answer was actually -6, but in our x we got +6. And then our answer was also 1/3, but we got -1/3. So that's a great way to check that you did all of this solving part here correctly. And then let's just write our answer in our final notation. So x is equal to -6, comma 1/3 in curly braces. All right, and that's it for today's lesson. I hope all of you guys have a great day.